Chair would remind all members that they should not traffic the well while members are under recognition. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for the reading of the Constitution. Gentleman may inquire.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we appreciate the leadership shown to bring this document for reading today, but I do want to inquire of the chair and perhaps the gentleman who is the author of this effort today, Mr. Goodlatte. The language, as I understand it, that we will be reading today does not include some of the original language of the Constitution of the United States. On multiple occasions, amendments have purported to change some of the intent of the original document.
Does the gentleman have a parliamentary
inquiry? I do have. My parliamentary inquiry is, will we be reading the entire original document without deletion, or will we be reading a document with deletions that may or may not have been accomplished by respective amendments?
Pursuant to Section 5A of House Resolution 5, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia to read the Constitution of the United States.
And may I inquire of the gentleman, if I may inquire before we start this process, of the gentleman, if he would explain to us so that we will all be on the same page.
The gentleman is not recognized for that purpose.
If I may ask the gentleman, unanimous consent, if I may ask the gentleman to yield for this question. I ask unanimous consent to ask the gentleman to yield for a question.
The gentleman from Virginia is not recognized for debate. This is not a debate.
I'll wait till Mr. Goodlatte is recognized and I'll ask him to yield so we can have clarity of this.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for the reading of the Constitution, not for debate.
If I may ask unanimous consent to ask Mr. Goodlatte to yield for just a question so we all understand the reading.
Does the gentleman from Washington have a parliamentary inquiry?
Yes, my parliamentary inquiry is, may I ask the gentleman to yield for 30 seconds to ask a question of the derivation of this language that we will all be reading in good faith and good spirits today.
That is not in order at this point. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, as a part of the opening remarks, I will explain and I hope answer the question of the gentleman from Washington. This morning, for the first time in the history of the House of Representatives, we will read aloud the full text of the Constitution of the United States. We hope this will inspire many more Americans to read the Constitution. The text we are reading today reflects the changes to the document made by the 27 amendments to it. Those portions superseded by amendment will not be read. In order to ensure fairness for all those interested in participating, we have asked members to line up on a first-come, first-served basis. I will recognize members based on this guidance. In order to assure relative parity and fairness, I may recognize members out of order to ensure bipartisanship and balance. 2 members, one from each party, will be recognized out of order. Each member will approach the podium and read the passage laid out for him or her. The Speaker and 2 members of the leadership of each party will begin the reading, and then I will recognize members in order. I thank the members of both parties in advance for their participation in this historic event, and I thank...
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of parliamentary procedure. Now that the process has started, would the gentleman from Washington's original question about parliamentary procedure, would his question be in order at this time?
In light of the gentleman's modicum of debate, that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
If I may make unanimous consent to ask Mr. Goodlatte a question so that we all do understand the nature of the language that we will be reading today, I think it would be very helpful to us on a bipartisan basis. So I would like to ask Mr. Goodlatte if he could explain...
Without objection, the gentleman from Virginia may yield for that purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Goodlatte, could you explain to us the decision-making process about which language to read today? And the reason I ask is through our American history, we've had a series of amendments that were intended to change the original document. but the amendments do not make specific deletions to specific language in the original document. And it's been up to us to ascertain the intent of the amendments to figure out which really language is operative or not. But the language has not specifically been deleted by the amendments. So it could be subject to some interpretation of which language really has been removed and which has not. And so I think it would be helpful to the members if you explain to us how the determinations of what to read has been made or not made, so that we all be on the same page as to congressional intent.
Well, I thank the gentleman for his question. We have consulted with the Congressional Research Service of the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress actually maintains a copy of the Constitution which includes those sections that have been superseded by amendment. So we are not reading those sections that have been superseded by amendment, and we have arrived at that determination based upon our consultation with the Congressional Research Service.
And would the gentleman accept the premise that since we have not been able to review the exact language we will be reading today, that this is not, thank you, gentlemen, but Mr. Goodlatte, I'll wait for a moment, Mr. Speaker, thank you.
House will be in order.
We do want to have a good bipartisan success here today, and this is a special moment for us all. So I guess the question is, I take it that since we've not had discussion about which language to read or not, that this is not intended to create any statement of congressional intent about the language, but rather to do our best to have a moment of comity to read the language as best as we can ascertain it. Is that correct?
I think the gentleman has stated that very well.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate your leadership in bringing this to our attention today. Thank you, Ed.
Gentleman from Virginia. For what purpose is the gentleman from Illinois rise?
I'd like to ask Mr. Goodlatte a parliamentary inquiry.
Inquire.
Thank you. Let me first of all thank.
Is the gentleman asking unanimous consent?
Mr. Speaker, if I may ask unanimous consent to
Does the
address
gentleman
Mr.
from
Goodlatte.
Virginia yield for that purpose?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
And I thank the gentleman for his kindness. Let me first begin by saying that I think every member of this body is approaching the reading of their Constitution with the most sacred possible spirit in what is clearly an unprecedented moment in the history of the Congress of the United States. And I don't take it very seriously, I don't take it very lightly when my colleague or when others, before we begin the reading of our sacred document, are raising questions about what we will specifically be reading, what specifically will be didacted based upon amendments or based upon the recommendations of libraries of Congress. But I also want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Goodlatte, I recognize that this is a request, that in reading those didacted, this is very emotional for me. It's very emotional for, I know, a number of members, given the struggle, and I'm not trying to take a shot at the process, and Mr. Goodlatte knows me, and he knows the spirit within which I'm approaching this. Given the struggle of African Americans, given the struggle of women, given the struggle of others to create a more perfect document, while not perfect, a more perfect document, to hear that those elements of the Constitution that have been didacted by amendment are no less serious, no less part of our ongoing struggle to improve the country and to make the country better, and our sense in our struggle in whom we are at the Congress of the United States at this point in American history, and our desire to continue to improve the Constitution. Many of us don't want that to be lost upon the reading of our sacred document. And so with that said, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I just wanted to indicate that this is done with sincerity. It is not done to take a shot at the idea of reading the Constitution, but certainly when we were informed, for example, that the 3/5 clause would not be mentioned and that other elements of the Constitution which justify why some of us fight for programs in the Congress will not be written in the didacted version, it is of consequence to who we are. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I take them very much to heart, as has our leadership. In fact, in recognition of the gentleman's concern, I mentioned in my comments that only 2 members would be recognized out of order to read sections. One is the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who will read the first article of Section 3 dealing with the judiciary. The other is the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Lewis, who many regard as the foremost advocate for civil rights in the Congress, he will read the 13th Amendment. And in that regard, we hope to address the concern that you raised.
Gentleman, yield for just one moment.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent?
Ask unanimous consent.
Will the gentleman yield for that purpose?
I yield.
Without objection.
Out of the same deference and respect for this document that we revere, I think it's important that we use the language of the Constitution itself. They are not deletions, they are amendments. And in that respect, we go by the amended document, not by the deleted document. There are too many that have fought and died for those amendments to call them deletions. With that, I yield back.
It is an amended document. We are going to read the document as amended. I thank the members of both parties in advance for their participation in this historic event. I thank the leadership and members for providing for this reading in the rules of the House. It is now my distinct honor to yield to the Speaker of the House to begin the reading.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
I now yield to the Minority Leader, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi.
Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives.
I now yield to the Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Cantor.
Article 1, Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct.
I now yield to the Minority Whip, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
Article 1, continuation of Section 2. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative. And until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment.
I now yield to the gentleman from California, the Majority Whip, Mr. McCarthy.
Article 1, Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after, they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election. They shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Rothman. I would ask members to read the page right in front of them and not continue.
The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the second year, of the second class at the expiration of the fourth year, and of the third class at the expiration of the sixth year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every second year.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway.
No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years and have been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen.
I now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall not have no vote unless they be equally divided. The Senate shall choose their other officers and also a President pro tempore. In the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of President of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kreitz.
Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe.
Section 4. The times, places, and manner of the holding of elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Wiener.
Section 5. Each House shall be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualification of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day, and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each House may provide.
I now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall.
Each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards.
Each House shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy. And the yeas and nays of the members of either House on any question shall, at the discretion of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Miller.
Neither House, during the session of Congress, shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two Houses shall be sitting.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Section 6, the senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall, in all cases, except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same. And for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts.
No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments whereof shall have been increased during such time, and no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pascrell.
Section 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills.
Now I yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it, with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, which shall enter the objections at large on their journal, and proceed to reconsider it.
Apologies. I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it be, if after such consideration 2/3 of the House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered. And if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each house, respectively.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Davis.
If any such bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law, in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo.
Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and House of Representatives according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of a bill.
I now yield to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excise, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance.
To borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states, and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
To coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measures, to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States, to establish post offices and post roads.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hensarling.
To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries.
I now yield to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Inslee.
To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations.
I now yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan.
To declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt.
To provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Canseco.
To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectfully the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by succession of particular states, and the exception and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings.
I now yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. West.
and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or office thereof.
I now yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the estates now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Black.
The privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed.
I now yield to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. McMorris Rogers.
No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall vessels bound to or from one state be obligated to enter, clear, or pay duties to another.
Now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Honda.
No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. An irregular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time.
Now yield to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner.
No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office or profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Loretta Sanchez.
No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or consideration, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility.
I now yield to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo.
No state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws. And the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel.
No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit to delay.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Hayworth.
Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during a term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature therefore may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector.
I now yield to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young.
The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone.
No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to be the office of President. Neither shall
The chair would remind persons in the gallery, all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House, and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of the proceedings is a violation of the rules of the House. The chair notes a disturbance in the gallery in contravention of the law and rules of the House. The Sergeant at Arms will remove those persons responsible for the disturbance and restore order in the gallery. Gentleman from Virginia. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
The President shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them.
Now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Richardson.
Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta.
Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called in actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of the respective offices, and he shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law.
I now yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Cassidy.
But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. DeGette.
The President shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of the next session.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Section 3. He shall from time to time give the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement, between them.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich.
With respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat.
The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office.
I now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop.
Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made, or which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
to controversies to which these United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between the citizens of different states, between the citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, and citizens or subjects.
Now yield to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Donnelly.
In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce.
The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed, but not when committed within any state. The trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Altmaier.
Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in an open court.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
The Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but to no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture, except during the life of the person attainted.
I now yield to the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. Carney.
Article 4, Section 1. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress may by general laws prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved, and the effect thereof.
I now yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris.
Section 2. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states.
Now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime.
I now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs.
Section 3. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of the 2 or more states, or parts of states, without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as for the Congress.
Now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
The Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state.
I now yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Matsui.
Article 6. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all the treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Any things in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding.
I now yield to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States.
Now yield to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn.
The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hirono.
The word "the" being interlined between the 7th and 8th lines of the first page, the word 30 being partly written on an erasure in the 15th line of the first page, the words "is tried" being interlined between the 32nd and 33rd lines of the first page, and the word "the" being interlined between the 43rd and the 44th lines of the second page.
I now yield to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
Done in convention by unanimous consent of the states, present the 17th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 12th in witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names.
I now recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Carnahan.
Signers of the Constitution: George Washington, President and Deputy from Virginia. Delaware: George Reed, Gunning Bedford, John Dickinson, Richard Bassett, Jacob Broom. Maryland: James McHenry, Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, Daniel Carroll. Virginia: John Blair, James Madison, Jr.
I now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
From the state of North Carolina, William Blount, Richard Dobbs Spate, Hugh Williamson. From South Carolina, John Rutledge, Charles Coatsworth Pinckney, Charles Pinckney, Pierce Butler. From Georgia, William Few, Abraham Baldwin.
Now yield to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott.
New Hampshire, John Langdon, Nicholas Gilman. Massachusetts, Nathaniel Gorham, Rufus King. Connecticut, William Samuel Johnson, Roger Sherman. New York, Alexander Hamilton.
Now yield to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Yoder.
From New Jersey, William Livingston, David Brearley, William Patterson, Jonathan Dayton. From Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Mifflin, Robert Morris, George Clymer, Thomas Fitzsimmons, Jared Ingersoll, James Wilson, and Governor Morse.
I now yield to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I'm reading the preamble to the Bill of Rights. Congress of the United States, begun and held at the city of New York on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 1789.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Roby.
The conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution.
I now yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Ross.
Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, two-thirds of both houses concurring, that the following articles be proposed to the legislatures of the several states as amendments to the Constitution of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Bonner.
All or any which articles, when ratified by 3/4 of the said legislatures, to be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the said Constitution.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Hawaii, Ms. Hanabusa.
Articles in addition to an amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America proposed by Congress and ratified by the legislatures of the several states pursuant to the 5th article of the original Constitution.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Giffords.
The First Amendment
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
I now yield to the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Ginta.
The Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
The Third Amendment. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert.
Amendment 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Now yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
The Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger.
Now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham. I now yield to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks.
Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be put twice in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
The Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law.
I now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland.
And to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for the obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense.
Now yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski.
Amendment 7. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores.
Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted.
I now yield to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walz.
The Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people.
Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the people respectively, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. I now yield to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Sickling.
The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state.
Now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Graves.
Amendment number 12. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom, at least, shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in district ballots the person voted for as vice president.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel.
And they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president, and of all persons voted for as vice president, and of the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify, and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate.
I now yield to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Stutzman.
The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president. If such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president.
Now yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price.
The House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the President. But in choosing the President, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice.
I now yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
The person having the greatest number of votes as vice president shall be the vice president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have a majority, then from the 2 highest numbers of the list, the Senate shall choose the vice president.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu.
A quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice. But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of President shall be eligible to that of Vice President of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Lewis.
Amendment 13, Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
Thank you, John. I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Ridgell.
All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States.
I now yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Watt.
Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Clark.
Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Elmers.
or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support to the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may by a vote of 2/3 of each house remove such disability.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Israel.
Section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of the insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void.
The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
Section 5. The Congress should have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Amendment 15, Section 1. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
Section 2. The Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Amendment 16. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration.
I now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
Amendment 17. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years. Each senator shall have 1 vote. The electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislatures.
Now yield to the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson.
When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Burkle.
Amendment 19, passed by Congress June 4th, 1919, ratified August 18th, 1920. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
I now yield to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Schwartz.
The terms of the President and the Vice President shall end at noon on the 20th day of January, and the terms of Senators and Representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January of the years in which such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and the terms of their successors shall then begin.
Now yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Section 2. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meetings shall begin at noon on the 3rd day of January, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. Section 3. If at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of the President-elect shall have died, the Vice President-elect shall become President.
Now yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
If a president shall not have been chosen before the time fixed for the beginning of his term, or if the president-elect shall have failed to qualify, then the vice president-elect shall act as president until the president shall have qualified. And the Congress may by law provide for the case written wherein neither a president-elect nor a vice president shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, or the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected. And such person shall act accordingly until a president or a vice president shall have been qualified.
I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Hurt.
Section 4. The Congress may, by law, provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, and for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the Senate may choose a vice president, whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Serrano.
Section 5. Sections 1 and 2 shall take effect on the 15th day of October following the ratification of this article. Section 6. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states within 7 years from the date of its submission.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Platts.
Amendment 21, passed by Congress February 20th, 1933, ratified December 5th, 1933. Section 1, the 18th article of amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. Section 2, the transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery or use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the laws thereof is hereby prohibited.
I now yield to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader.
Section 3. This article should be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by conventions in the several states, as provided in the Constitution within 7 years from the date of submission hereof to the states by the Congress.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Meehan.
The 22nd Amendment, passed by Congress on March 21st, 1947. Section 1. No person shall be elected to the office of the President more than twice, and no person who has held the office of President or acted as President
for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once.
I now yield to the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunnally.
But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which this article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term.
Now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller.
But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which the article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term.
Now yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Fleming.
Section 2. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states within 7 years from the date of its submission to the states by the Congress.
And now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Amendment 23, passed by Congress June 16, 1960, ratified March 29, 1961. Section 1. The district constituting the seat of government of the United States shall appoint in such manner as Congress may direct a number of electors of President and Vice President equal to the whole number of senators and representatives in Congress to which the district would be entitled if it were a state.
I now yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce.
But in no event more than the least populous state. They shall be in addition to those appointed by the states, but they shall be considered, for the purposes of the election of President and Vice President, to be electors appointed by a state, and they shall meet in the district and perform such duties as provided by the 12th Article of Amendment. Section 2. The Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
I now yield to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Amendment 24, passed by Congress August 27, 1962, ratified January 23, 1964. Section 1. The right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for President or Vice President, for electors for President or Vice President, or for Senator or Representative in Congress shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by the reason of failure to pay poll tax or other tax. Section 2. The Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
Now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent.
Amendment 25, passed by Congress July 6, 1965. Section 1. In case of the removal of the President from office or his death or resignation, the Vice President shall become President. Section 2.
Whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the Vice President, the President shall nominate a Vice President who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress.
Now yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
Whenever the President transmits to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President.
Now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy.
Section 4. Whenever the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President.
Now yield to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler.
Thereafter, when the President transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide.
I now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Transmit within 4 days to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session.
I now yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gibson.
If the Congress, within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 vote or both houses that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall continue to discharge the same as acting President. Otherwise, the President shall resume the powers and duties of his office.
I now yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hultgren.
Amendment 26, passed by Congress March 23, 1971, ratified July 1, 1971. Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation.
I now yield to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fincher, who will read the last section of the Constitution, of the amendments.
Amendment 27, originally proposed September 25th, 1789, ratified May 7th, 1992. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened.
Mr. Speaker, with apology to those few members who were waiting to read, we have now completed the first reading aloud of the United States Constitution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?